What if I told you the 60s music war wasn't just about chart toppers and screaming fans, but about cultural dominance, raw attitude, and who really changed the world? Because while the Beatles wore matching suits and sang "Love Me Do," the Rolling Stones were out there biting back with "I Can't Get No Satisfaction." But let's cut the nostalgia for a second. Which band truly dominated the 1960s? Let's settle this once and for all. All right, folks, this is where it gets real. You're sitting there, maybe with your morning coffee or flipping through memories of your teenage years, hearing the first guitar twang of Day Tripper or the gritty riff of Jumpin' Jack Flash. You felt those songs in your bones, but here's the thing. For decades, people have thrown down over this question like it's a musical version of Yankees versus Red Sox. Beatles or Stones? Pop perfection or rock rebellion? Global peace or primal energy? This isn't just a battle of songs, it's about influence, longevity, and who truly owned the decade. So let's break this thing down. Fairly factually, but yeah, we're gonna ruffle a few feathers too. And hey, if you're still with us by the middle, I wanna hear your take. Beatles or Stones? Drop it in the comments. We're not ending this debate, we're fanning the flames. The Arrival, clean vs. dirty. Picture this. It's the early 60s. America is still reeling from Elvis joining the army, Buddy Holly is gone, and doo-wop is slowly dying out. Then, boom, the Beatles hit Ed Sullivan in February 1964. Suddenly, four mop-haired Brits land like a UFO on American soil, singing harmonies so tight you could hang a picture frame on them. She Loves You and I Want to Hold Your Hand were more than songs. They were an invasion. Beatlemania swept the US like wildfire. Meanwhile, while in the shadows, the Rolling Stones were sharpening their knives. Mick, Keith, Brian, Charlie, and Bill were lurking with a bluesy, raunchier sound. They didn't smile for the cameras. They weren't here to hold your hand. They were here to shake your soul. They looked like the guys your mother warned you about, and that was the point. While the Beatles wore matching suits, the Stones wore scowls. Now let me ask you this. Did you want the boys next door or the bad boys down the alley? The Songwriting Game. Who really wrote the 60s sound? The Beatles, to their credit, were unmatched in songwriting innovation. From the cheerful simplicity of Can't Buy Me Love to the psychedelic mysticism of Tomorrow Never Knows, Lennon and McCartney wrote the soundtrack to a decade. George Harrison? Quiet, yes, but his Indian influences and slide guitar shaped the later sound. But don't sleep on Jagger and Richards. Yes, their early stuff borrowed heavily from blues legends, but once they hit their stride, the Stones were machines. Paint It Black, Sympathy for the Devil, Gimme Shelter. These weren't just songs, they were mood swings written in blood and sweat. And here's where it gets spicy. Some argue the Beatles got too experimental, too fast. Ever heard Revolution 9? Yeah, what was that? The Stones, on the other hand, kept things gritty, raw. Some say repetitive, others say real. So here's the question. Would you rather have musical evolution or emotional revolution? Image and attitude. Who did you believe? The Beatles started as lovable lads, but by '67, they were psychedelic monks. Sgt. Pepper was a kaleidoscope of colors and concept. But did it get a little too artsy for its own good? I mean, let's be honest, did you really listen to all of the White Album? Or just skip to While My Guitar Gently Weeps? The Stones? They stayed dirty, unpredictable, sometimes straight up dangerous. They wore their sins like medals. While the Beatles said, "All you need is love," the Stones screamed, "Street fighting man." And here's a wild thought. Did the Beatles invent the modern pop star only for the Stones to steal the rock and roll crown right after? Which image stuck with you more? The barefoot Beatles on Abbey Road? Or Mick Jagger strutting like a peacock in tight pants, daring you to look away? Now, here's where you come in. You're not just a listener, you lived this era. You remember where you were when Hey Jude first played? You cranked the volume when Sympathy for the Devil came on the radio. Maybe when your parents told you not to. So tell us, who really ruled your 1960s? The thoughtful, evolving Beatles? Or the fire-starting, swaggering Stones? Drop a comment. Start a fight. A friendly debate. And hey, if you're loving this trip down memory lane, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe. Because here at Decade Legends, we don't just remember the 60s, we dig into them. Albums that shook the world. Now let's talk records. The Beatles had albums that changed music forever. Rubber Soul, Revolver, Sgt. Pepper. These weren't just collections of songs, they were statements. Studio wizardry, lyrical brilliance, emotional depth. But critics argue, was it too polished? Too perfect? The Stones brought Aftermath, Beggars Banquet, and Let It Bleed. Rawer, meaner, maybe even more human? Exile on Main Street came a bit later, sure, but the groundwork was laid in the 60s. They never tried to please everyone, they pleased themselves, and it just worked. And let's be real, who didn't feel chills the first time they heard the haunting background vocals on Gimme Shelter? But ask yourself this, which albums still feel like the 60s? And which ones still sound timeless? The live show. Who owned the stage? The Beatles stopped touring in '66, tired of screaming fans drowning out their amps, and honestly, who could blame them? They focused on the studio, sure, but they missed out on building that deeper, louder live connection. The Stones? They thrived on stage. Their concerts weren't just music, they were a riot, a religious experience. Jagger working the crowd like a preacher, Keith wrangling his guitar like it owed him money. You didn't just watch a Stones concert, you survived it. So when you think about domination, was it radio hits? Or did it happen in sweaty clubs, packed arenas, and unforgettable chaos? Controversy and courage. Who pushed harder? Don't let me down. Let's not kid ourselves. Controversy followed both bands. The Beatles dropped Jaws when Lennon said they were more popular than Jesus. That shook up middle America harder than a shot of bourbon. Radio stations burned Beatles records, pastors preached sermons, and yet kids kept listening. Because deep down it wasn't about religion, it was about fear of change. And the Beatles, they were change. But the Stones? They invited the controversy. They dared the world to hate them. They sang about sex, drugs, and riots. They got busted for drugs, showed up in court like rock royalty, and left the courthouse with smirks. While the Beatles asked for peace, the Stones gave you chaos. Ever listen to Under My Thumb and think, can they say that? Yep, they did.
Once had me down under my thumb.
And they didn't care what you thought. So let me ask you, did the Beatles break boundaries with class? Or did the Stones break rules with guts? Which takes more courage? Cultural dominance. Who really defined the era?
You say goodbye and I say hello.
Here's where it gets tricky. The Beatles defined the mainstream of the 1960s. They had the mass appeal. They changed how albums were made, how songs were written, how fans idolized artists. They made it okay for men to grow their hair out, wear color, and ask big questions like, why are we here? Instead of just, where's the party? But the Stones? They were the undercurrent, the darker spirit. They captured the unrest, the tension, the rebellion. They weren't just a band, they were a movement. When you think of the Summer of Love, sure, you think of the Beatles. But when you think of the Altamont concert in '69, where a man was killed just feet from the stage during a Stones performance, that's the moment the '60s died for many. It was raw, it was tragic, and it was real. So here's a brutal question for you. Is it better to define a decade or to reflect it, warts and all? The decline. Who fell faster? No one stays on top forever. The Beatles released Let It Be in 1970, but they were already unraveling.
Let it be. But though they may
Ego clashes, creative differences, Yoko Ono, business messes. It was a slow implosion of the biggest band in the world. They never played together again. And maybe that's the tragedy and the beauty of the Beatles. They burned bright and left before the fire dimmed. The Stones? They kept going. Even into the 70s, 80s, 90s, and yeah, they're still touring now, like musical cockroaches that refuse to die. But let's be honest, did their edge fade a little? By the time disco hit, the Stones were trying to stay relevant with albums like Emotional Rescue. Some hits, sure, but did it feel like the same band from '68? So tell me, is it better to go out on top like the Beatles? Or keep swinging like the Stones even if you start missing a few punches? The afterlife. Who stayed relevant longer?
Ticket to ride, but she don't care.
It's been over 50 years since both bands ruled the charts. The Beatles, despite breaking up, became a myth, a legend. Their songs are studied, dissected, and re-released, with cleaned-up mixes and documentaries narrated by Sir Paul himself. Even the kids today know Let It Be. Their brand is immortal. The Stones? They stayed visible. Still touring, still making albums, still finding ways to slip into pop culture. You've seen Jagger with Taylor Swift,
All I hear is the sound.
Keith Richards playing Jack Sparrow's dad in Pirates of the Caribbean. These guys refuse to vanish. But has that visibility diluted the magic? The Beatles died young and beautiful as a band. The Stones aged with us, gray, wrinkled, but still rocking. Maybe that's the more honest story. Which legacy would you rather have? Final verdict, who truly dominated the 60s? Okay, deep breath. If we're talking raw numbers, chart toppers, fan hysteria, cultural saturation, the Beatles win. No contest. They were the soundtrack of suburban homes and radio stations across the country. But if we're talking edge, defiance, pure rock and roll rebellion, the Stones take the crown. Here's the twist though, this wasn't really a war. The Beatles and the Stones played different games. One gave you hope, light, and evolution. The other gave you rebellion, attitude, and adrenaline. Both were essential, both changed the world. But if you forced us to choose, if you backed us into a corner and made us pick a name, we'd say the Beatles dominated the decade. But the Stones, they survived it. And maybe, just maybe, that's the bigger accomplishment. Now let's hand this one over to you. Drop a comment below. Who won the 60s in your eyes, and why? Was it the Beatles with their melody and magic? Or the Stones with their fire and fury? No wrong answers here. Just decades of passion, stories, and debate. And hey, if this video hit your nostalgia bone just right, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to Decade Legends, and share this with that one friend who always thinks Revolver was overrated. We've got more battles, breakdowns, and deep dives coming because this music isn't just history, it's your story. See you in the next one.